Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Several weeks ago, I got a rather spunky email from Amy saying, hey, I'm going to be up in Boston to give a speech, and they told me I have to have a man introduce me, and would you be available? So I said, well, of course. Now, my context with Amy is I met her well before she began making waves. When my old law firm of 26 years, Benjamin and Benson, started in 1985, she came to us as an intern. And if I recall correctly, she had just finished up at Tabor Academy and was taking a gap year, and said, how can I help? And we do family law. We represent a lot of very interesting professional people. The situations are by and large pretty calm, and it's good people and kind of just get me through this rough period. And I could count on her for almost anything. Clients really liked her. No matter how big or how small the task, she was always up for it. She was just basically wonderful. Now, we couldn't pay her as much as Christie's paid her. If you hadn't read the program, they paid her $10 a week. But what we were able to offer her was some very wonderful women role models. My partner, Roberta Benjamin, was the first president of the Massachusetts chapter of the National Organization for Women back in 1970, and she was, whip smart and sort of really, in the best sense of the term, the best combination of a man and a woman rolled up into one, really neat lady. And then we also had Phyllis Coleman, who got divorced, went to law school in her early 40s, and became a very, very good and respected lawyer. And I think the most important person in Amy's life as a role model, was her mother. She was a single parent. She worked at I'm just blank, AT&T, and was a leader in labor negotiations. So, I'm not surprised where Amy is now because of people that were, so important to her along the way. So I'd like you to welcome my good friend, Amy Richard.
Thank you for having me. And just to give you a sense of how maybe overly confident I was as an 18-year-old, I do think I remember ending that internship and asking, has anyone ever gone on to be a lawyer without going to law school? Needless to say, I'm still not a lawyer. But thank you, John, for that. And more so, thank you for the opportunity to work in that law firm. I mean, he sort of described it as an easy place, but what I remember was that I was learning about, for the first time, real deep stories about the Holocaust, because some of our clients have been Holocaust survivors, or those stories were in their families. I was learning about sexual abuse that existed in families. I was learning about unequal pay that existed in relationships. I was learning about how mean people could be to one another who said they loved each other. And when I reflect back on that time, I feel like in many ways it was my first introduction to feminism. And I would say thank you for introducing me to those things, although it does sound a little odd to say thank you for telling me about sexual abuse and showing me about the Holocaust. But it was a real thank you, because I think it's a lot, and this is what I think makes someone a feminist, is there's a lot of a social desire to cover those things up. And I think that once we're exposed to them, we become committed to changing them. And so it became a very pivotal time in my life. And I think the most important thing I realized as a sort of lowly 18-year-old intern, pre-internet, was that I would answer the phone and try to help people. And I realized that powerful men could be really weak, and that weak women could be really strong. And it was a great lesson in sort of not judging a book by its cover. Before I go forward in my remarks, I want to go back in time a little bit and show you a clip from a project that I've been working on. The project is called Makers, Women Making America, and I don't know if people caught it on PBS. It's been showing your WGBH here in Boston. And it is not only a wonderful 3-hour documentary, but it's a permanent archive at makers.com that will be the largest collection of women's stories. I can't remember the current page per views, but it's something around 24 million. And it's impressive numbers, but it's more impressive stories. And so I want to introduce you to Kathrine. Roll the tape, please.
A record field of 601 starters braved chilly winds and a steady drizzle in the 71st Boston Marathon.
The 1967 Boston Marathon was run in some of the worst conditions in race history. While most of the crowd was focused on the front of the pack, another runner was making a stir far behind.
The idea of running long distance was always considered very questionable for women because, you know, an arduous activity would mean that you're going to get big legs and grow a mustache and hair on your chest and your uterus was going to fall out.
In 1967, Kathrine Switzer was a junior at Syracuse University. Because Syracuse had no women's track team, she began training with the manager of the men's team, a part-time mailman named Arnie Briggs.
It was Arnie who told me about the greatest day in his life every year, which was the Boston Marathon. And we were out running, and Arnie began telling me another Boston Marathon story. And I said, oh, Arnie, let's just quit talking about the darn marathon and run it. And my dream then became to prove that I could run 26 miles, 385 yards.
For 70 years, the Boston Marathon had excluded women. But Switzer entered using just her initials.
We walked to the start, and the gun went off, and down the street we went. So there we were, Arnie Briggs, the 50-year-old mailman, and me, the 20-year-old college student, and my boyfriend, Tom Miller, the ex-All-American football player. When other runners would come by, they would say, oh, it's a girl, and they were so excited. And all of a sudden, the press truck is in front of us, and they're taking, pictures of us. On this truck was the race director, the feisty guy by the name of Jock Semple. He just stopped the bus, jumped off, and ran after me. And he just grabbed me and screamed at me, get the hell out of my race and give me those numbers. He had the fiercest face of any guy I'd ever seen. And all of a sudden, Big Tom, my boyfriend, came with a streak and gave Jock the most incredible crossbody block. He sent Jock flying right through the air and landed on the curb. And all of this happened in front of the press truck. Journalists got very aggressive. What are you trying to prove? Are you a suffragette? Are you a crusader? Whatever that is, And I said, what? I'm just trying to run. Then it got very quiet. Snow's coming down. Nobody's saying anything. And I turned to Arnie, and I said, Arnie, I'm gonna finish this race on my hands and my knees if I have to. If I don't finish this race, then everybody's gonna believe women can't do it. I've got to finish this race. I finished that race in 4 hours, 20 minutes. It wasn't until we stopped on the thruway to get an ice cream and some coffee that we see the newspapers and the coverage front and back of all the different editions with the pictures. I realized that now this was very, very important, and was going to change my life, and it was probably going to change women's sports. There is an expression in a marathon that you do go through sort of a lifetime of experience. And I often say that I started the Boston Marathon as a girl, and I finished the Boston Marathon as a grown woman.
I wanted to show that clip, not just because we could, give a shout out to the Big Tom, and because it's a great story, but it's about Boston. I know you have the marathon coming up, and I'm a marathon runner, and so it has sort of personal resonance in my life. But I also think it's a really good illustration of what feminism is. It's a good illustration because, like Kathrine, so many people come to feminism accidentally. You don't wake up and say, you know, as Kathrine said, I'm going to be a crusader. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to break down all those barriers. You confront a door that's closed and you say, why is it closed? Can I please come in? You know, and I remember being a junior in my high school, and in defense of the high school, it had been all boys, you know, just 5 years before I got there. And I said, I want to run for head of school. And a teacher said, but girls don't run for head of school. There's never been a girl that was head of school. And I was like, but I want to run. And similarly, the girls' soccer program, we got the boys' old uniforms. We had a team, but we had to wear the boys' old uniforms. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound fair. And I think that there are so many people. You know, there's, you know, Anita Hill in Imagination, and Erin Brockovich, and there's people who just confront something and they're forced into it. And I think that that's how change gets made in this country. I also love Kathrine's story because it shows, I think, what makes somebody a maker versus what makes somebody a powerful woman, which is that it's not just about benefiting yourself, it's about making sure that benefit benefits other people. And she says it in there. She says, if I don't finish this, they'll think girls can't do it. And there's so many clips. I watched this interview with Ruth Simmons the other day when she was offered the presidency of Brown University, and she said, I don't want to take it. And a colleague of hers at Smith said, you have to. If you don't say yes, they'll never give it to another woman. And there, you know, long before Sheryl Sandberg was telling women to lean in, there are these stories of women who said yes, not so much because they wanted to, but they didn't want to have no said to more women. I also think, I mean, the one advantage of Switzer, too, is that she shows that once women get access, there's sort of no turning back. And when Kathrine finished the race in 1967 in 4 hours and 20 minutes, top man that year, 2:15. Top man in 2012, 2:12. Top woman, 2:30. So what it shows, I mean, sorry for the men in the room. I'm like, there's a little stagnation, but women, we're still playing catch up, but we're doing a really good job of playing catch up. And so once women get that access, I think that we prove not only that women can do it, but that we're capable of being in there. That said, the change that feminism has brought about has not come easily. And last night I was actually in central Pennsylvania giving a talk at a university, and we were talking about the integration of the military and on the front lines. And I was sort of arguing that it's not new that women are on the front lines, it's new that they're allowed to be legally on the front lines. Women have been there for decades, or really in the last two wars specifically. And he said, he was arguing to me, basically saying, yeah, but their uteruses might fall out if they were going to be pulling men out of combat. And I thought, what? He said, but they can't do that. They'll give up. They'll leave me. And I was like, I think if we know anything about human nature, a woman is probably less likely to leave somebody out in the woods because there's that maternal instinct that we hear so much about. So it's not to say that this change has been easy, and it's not to say that because we have changed that we still don't have the resistance to that change. And I think that that's what presents the biggest challenge to feminism today. We look around, we see women who are in incredibly powerful positions. We see women who are doing it all and having it all and being athletic superstars, and we see women who are running for political office in ways that we never could have imagined 25 years ago. And so we think it's better than it is. And the fact is that only a certain number of people have been able to succeed in that, and there are still far too many people being left behind. And taking a step back, looking at sort of a feminist history, I think the hope was, well, if we change the laws, then women's lives will change for the better. And I think that what unfortunately has happened is that the laws have changed, and some women's lives have gotten better, but not all. You know, I was reading the news yesterday about Steubenville, Ohio, and all I could think of was 1989 and Glen Ridge, New Jersey. It was the same scenario. You know, here we are all these years later, and it's still happening. And why is it still happening? It's not happening because the laws aren't there. The laws are there. The law says that what happened is illegal. It's not happening because what happens to women in those situations? Well, why was she there in the first place? Why did she put herself in that scenario? Why? We underestimate, we challenge women. And more so, I think what we do is we overinflate the male narrative. And I think that that is something that as this generation of feminism is constantly challenged of what you're doing, is something that we have to contemplate. We can only make women so strong, and we can only value women in these institutions so to such an extent before we reevaluate what those institutions are and how friendly can they be to human nature over the long run. Speaking to a bunch of people that have something to do with the advertising industry, I do think that one of the biggest changes is all you have to do is look at a magazine in the 1970s and look at a magazine today. And women are definitely not being relegated to the home anymore. They're allowed to sort of be full people. And yet what that brings is often a challenge of women feeling like they have to do it all. And I'm sure most people have been sort of hearing about Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In, and I know I've been asked a lot about it over the last couple weeks. And I think that her book and her concept raises a very interesting concept to me about where feminism is today. I think women should lean in. I think men should lean in. I think that we should be encouraged to rise to our potential. But I think there's a danger in that narrative, because I think the narrative becomes that for women to be rewarded, for women to be valued in society, we have to be excellent. We're not just allowed to be good enough, we have to be the top of our field. We have to be the CEO of Facebook. We have to be Oprah. We have to be Martha Stewart. And I don't want to discount those examples and those achievements, and I certainly want women to rise to their potential, but I think it's a dangerous game where women have to be excellent and men get to be good enough. And I don't want women to fall into that trap of undervaluing what they're contributing. And I see a lot of women second-guessing what they're contributing if it's not at that uber level. And so I very much support that concept of lean in. I think we should all lean in where we are, but I worry about the long-term consequences of that. And I also worry because I think that the narrative becomes that feminism's success becomes measured on how well we claim that power or take that power, and not how well we change the institutions that we're integrating. And poll after poll, when women are given the opportunity to say what they want from their professional lives, and Catalyst, a wonderful organization, has done lots of studies on this, women more or less prefer to plateau their careers at a certain point. They prefer to say, I'd love to get to a certain, level of success, and then I'd like more time away with my kids, or to take care of my aging parents, or to volunteer in my community. I was at Morgan Stanley the other day giving a talk to a bunch of senior women, and a woman there said, I just feel so depressed. All the women leave once they get to a senior place. And I said, but why are you depressed? I said, I talked to 2 women who left. One's now running a jewelry company, and another woman's, working for the government, running, something with the Peace Corps. They're doing these amazing jobs. And so I think that when it's that success paradigm is still a very masculine narrative. And as long as we adhere to it, I don't think women are going to succeed in it as well. And I think that it doesn't benefit individual women, but it doesn't benefit society. I mean, I say that when women say over and over again that they want balance, it's because we only ask women. We don't ask men, what about the work-life balance? Well, if I hire you, what are you gonna do when you have a kid? We're still presuming that's a women's question. We're not asking it of men. A couple years ago, I was invited down to the White House. 18 months into the Obama administration, they were looking at the number of appointments they had made, political appointments, and they were shocked by how few female appointments they had made. I think it was around 22% at the time. And they brought a group of women down to basically give them names of more women. And they sort of laid out the scenario of what a political appointment looks like, and the average time is 18 months, and you have to go through a confirmation hearing, whether it's a public one or a private one. You have to expose your tax returns, and just be forewarned that when we hire women, we do ask them if they've paid their nanny tax ever since Zoe Baird was so exposed. And I said, just out of curiosity, do you ask it of men? It's a good question. I don't think we do. And the 18 months, I said, did you ever think of maybe promoting it that it would be 2 years? And they said, well, what's the difference between 18 months and 2 years? And I said, well, I think most women who have young kids wouldn't want to uproot their family for 1 school year, 1.5 school years. They're like, oh, we didn't even think of that. And I go back to that example because I think that as long as we're just asking women to merely insert themselves into these roles, we're going to reach a threshold that's around 33%, 35% of women, because we need the structures to reflect what our lives are, and we need them to reflect back more of the female narrative. And it doesn't mean that men cannot be a part of that narrative. They very much are. And Stuart Friedman, who runs a program at Wharton Business School, the Center for Work-Life Balance, he used to call it, the Center for Work-Family Balance. But when you say that, you hear women. When you say work-life, you hear everybody. And I think that, again, we poll women on these issues, but I think that once we allow men to contribute to the conversation, they realize how much they want that change as well. And to not harsh on men, because it's not about men versus women, but I do think that we are all vulnerable to overvaluing masculinity. And I think that that is one of the last hurdles within this sort of feminist revolution, because And I see it institutionally in the way we treat the military. I see it institutionally in the way when people say, oh, what have women achieved? We're like, well, they're university presidents, and we had Hillary Clinton run for office. And I see it in the way we treat the financial institutions, our dependence on war, these very masculine things. And I did feel like a couple years ago when the Wall Street was blowing up and the wars weren't working, it's like, blow up probably wasn't the right word to follow war, but it was my first glimpse into that maybe we are beginning to question these institutions and why have we depended upon them. In New York, there was a story last year of a student who came to the 7th grade, a female student, and she had a knife in her violin case, and it was at a private school in New York City. And everybody was outraged, and she was sort of threatening a male peer of hers. And everybody was outraged that they didn't suspend her, because had it been a boy, they would have suspended him. And I said, you're right, but here's the backstory on that, is that they don't take female violence seriously. It's not that they are treating girls lighter, it's that they don't think she's gonna really capable of doing anything. And so I do think there's this narrative that plays out in very subtle ways, and we contribute to it. And another Boston reference, which I feel, so inspired to be here. I'm actually from Marblehead, so I feel returning to my roots, is the wonderful Carol Gilligan, who logged a lot of hours at Harvard. And when she was there, one of the things she did was this amazing book in a different voice. And she wrote this book in the late 70s, and she was looking at Roe v. Wade, the decision that was in 1972 that gave, despite all of the headlines, it did both give women the right to terminate a pregnancy, but it also gave women the right to continue a pregnancy. It gave women control over their bodies. And that's what's so profound about that decision. She was looking 8 years out after that decision with sort of sadness and looking at a lot of women and feeling like they weren't owning the power that had just been granted to them. And why was that? And she was sitting in her classes at Harvard and realizing that she was guilty of the same thing she was critiquing. She was sitting in those classrooms, and when a man would ask a question, she would take it as a more serious question. When a woman would ask a question, she would take it as emotional. She would take it as personal, not as political. And she really challenged herself to reflect back and to say, what is that different voice, and why can't we hear that different voice, and try to change that. Okay, that was the early 80s. Now we're 2013, and I think we're still guilty of the same thing. I think that we are so much better articulating politically what we believe in and less able to execute personally what we believe in. And I say that as a challenge to myself. I say that as a challenge to those of us in this room, that I think when we're given the opportunity, we do have to, as Ruth Simmons when she took that job at Brown, we have to make hard choices. And we have to make those hard choices in part because of who we are in this room right now. I'm making a lot of assumptions, but I think that in this room comes a lot of privilege and maybe I'm only speaking for myself, a lot of education privilege, a lot of power, a lot of access. And I think that that's precisely where that type of change and where that example has to come from. You hear about the CEO of the company, there's a great Hewlett-Packard story, and it wasn't until the CEO sadly lost his wife and he had young kids where he realized, oh, this work balance thing is tough, I've got to figure it out. And it came from the top down. The civil rights movement, it took white people integrating themselves in the movement to realize, oh wait, this is a part of me too. It's doing me an injustice to live in this unequal society. Straight people aligning with the gay rights movement. I do think that for women and for this, the continuation of equality, it's gonna have to come from people whose lives feel more equal. And we're gonna have to set examples, and we're gonna have to set new barriers that are maybe more challenging to us. And I know that I'm perfectly guilty of this, but when people ask me to sort of give examples of what feminism has achieved, I default to really grand things. And I default to Hillary Clinton. I default to how many women are, that we have 20 women, including your amazing senator in the Senate. And I default to these examples. And yet, when I think about feminism more personally, it's really what I do every single day. And it's that I challenge myself to say, oh, that's right, I should pay my babysitter paid vacation leave, even though I really don't want to. I should take time out to, interact with people. Why is it when I look around my room sometimes, I believe in diversity, but my friends are all white? When I'm asked to speak about feminism, and then people say that feminism is all white, I think, well, maybe I should invite somebody who's not white to come along with me. And those are subtle little things, but I think collectively it adds up to changing how we see feminism and where we see feminism today. And I want to say that I'm 100% optimistic about feminism. I feel like I get asked, I'm no longer young, but for some reason I'm still one of the youngest people in the feminist conversation often. And I default to public opinion polls, which confirm time and time again that in that 18 to 24-year range, people are more likely to identify with feminism. And I think than any other age cohort, and more likely than at any other generation. And I think that makes sense to me because the more equality you grow up with, the more comfortable you get with it. And nobody can be lectured into feminism. That's what people say to me all the time, but young women don't understand those rights can be taken away from them. And I was like, you're right, but saying it to them over and over again isn't gonna make them believe it. But you have to look back at their own individual lives and look both, it was funny, Nicole said to me, I said, I'm a feminist, and she said, I'm the beneficiary of feminism. And I think that is something we have to say yes to. But I think that so often in feminism, what people say is, but don't take that for granted. And Nicole's a great example. She's not taking for granted. She's going on to do amazing things and using that example to inspire other people. And so we have to use our example of our accomplishments and our successes to inspire people. And I think we also have to use our examples of our weaknesses and of our limitations to show the direction that feminism still needs to go in. And I want to end by just giving one example that I return to over and over again in my life, which is when I was shortly after the law firm, shortly before Christie's, I was running a cross-country voter registration drive called Freedom Summer '92. And I set out to do this because I thought poor, marginalized, communities of color were being left out of the political process. And I thought, not unlike a lot of white civil rights people in the 60s, I thought, well, I'm gonna help them get that access. And it was about them, and I'm gonna be this noble person. And I sort of set off with people, and I organized this voter registration drive, and it was amazing and illuminating, and it really changed my life in so many ways. But the most profound way that it changed my life, I was on the phone with this wonderful man, James Farmer, who lived in Mississippi. And as you can tell, I talk really fast, and he lives in Mississippi, and he talked really slowly, and it was a very long conversation. And he said to me that I said, what advice can you give to these amazing people who are continuing in your wake? And he said, Paul, you have to believe it. And I said, but of course we believe it. Well, he says, no, I lived for so long as 2/3 of a citizen, I'm not sure I believed it. I fought for it, but I didn't believe it. And I think that we really have to believe it. And the other day, somebody asked me about the WNBA, and I said, no, but we watch the NBA, and and it doesn't mean we all have to go rush out there, but the next time you hear about a Steubenville, the next time you're confronted with women's sports, the next time, take that risk and challenge within yourself maybe how you're limiting your imagination of what is happening and what women are capable of and what you're capable of. And the follow-up to the James Farmer conversation was that I thought I was doing this for other people, and I really was, but I realized that if I don't live in a democracy that's living up to its promise of a democracy, that's doing a disservice to me. And so we might go on this journey, and that's why we have so many people who care more about what's happening in the Congo than what's happening in Roxbury, because we think it's about other people, but it really is about us. And whatever is going to take you to motivate it, find the thing you can do. You know, Gloria Steinem used to say, commit one outrageous act, and tomorrow you'll feel different. And last night somebody said, but how do you prevent from being angry? And I was like, but anger's good. Anger creates change. So allow yourself that outrageousness, allow yourself that anger, and don't apologize, and know that you're doing it because, like Kathrine Switzer, like Ruth Simmons, you're doing it so other people can benefit. Thank you.